community ownership, it means individual ownership. And so what does that then mean in practice? Well, if you're using me as training data, if you're using my input on Reddit, or if you're using my input on this chat agent, why shouldn't I get compensated for it? Or why shouldn't I be able to give you access to that when I want? Imagine a future where, for example, your medical data is no longer private. It's all been ingested, let's say, by a GPT model. That's kind of scary because you want to be the owner of your own personal data. And so that's how we see it as a public good. It needs to be owned by you, by the community, so that we can determine what models that we want to use and how to get compensated by it. Because let's assume, so McKinsey actually says that 70% of processes can be automated with AI. I actually think it's a lot more than that. It's probably closer to 90%. And so companies like Microsoft are starting to look at actually replacing a lot of software engineers with AI. And so in that future, who accrues all the benefits? It's the centralized companies. And so if I own a piece of AI and then my training data is being used as an inference call, for example, why can't there be a microtransaction back to me to actually benefit from that? So that's an alternative model to, let's say, a handful of companies own all this revenue, and then governments collect tax, and then they need to pay some type of universal basic income. So that's one solution to the problem. Or you have this ownership-based solution, which I think is much fairer, because you basically determine your contributions to the overall system. And so then you make AI a public good that's truly kind of owned by you, you get compensated by it, you can determine the future and the governance of different types of AI models. So it's an alternative view of what AI can become.
That was extremely insightful. To speak a little bit about what Joinable, thinks about AI as public good. At Joinable, we envision a world where AI serves the public good by empowering businesses and communities to leverage their own data, rather than relying on commercially hosted centralized models. This ensures greater transparency, privacy, and autonomy, aligning the vision of AI being a collective resource. AI needs data. There is no AI without data. So Joinable, fundamentally think joinable.ai equals data. We want high quality, scalable data that we will essentially clean, process, organize. It's as simple as that, and that's why at Joinable, we truly want to make sure data is at the highest quality. Now, the next question I have for Michael, you've spoken before about elevating collective consciousness. What role do you see decentralized AI playing in actually enabling that?
This is, I think, where it gets a little bit into philosophical territory, but imagine a future where you have hyper-intelligent AI systems, so artificial superintelligence, where essentially the AI can do specific things that humans can't, like process multiple things at once, go through very large data sets and give kind of inputs on probabilities and so on. I still think human beings can do things that will be able to do things that AI can't, because we have a specific nervous system. Through that nervous system, we can tap into, let's say, a deeper consciousness where new ideas can come up. But AI is trained off of a training data set that's all produced by humans in the past. But it can't just invent something that's completely novel outside of this training data set. And so I think there's always going to be a role for human beings in that equation. However, if you have a hyper-smart AI that's trained in such a way to evolve and elevate human beings over time and guide them to their potential, then why can't we have AI that's serving us in that capacity? And so the way to think about it is that some of my professors, for example, say that in 2 generations, we may not need to work for a living anymore. I mean, imagine just for a moment what that world looks like, not working for a living. And I would add to that is working for a living goes to working for kind of self-transcendence or self-elevation or for passion, rather. So if we have that type of a world, can AI guide us into what our self-actualization actually is? And so I believe that that's possible. because again, we can train AI however we want it to. And so I would want to see AI trained in such a way that it has our best interests in mind, so that from when we're very young all the way till we're grown adults and try to define our passion, that there is kind of a mentor there for us that has our best interests in mind. And so that's where I see especially decentralized AI supporting our journey from needing to work for a living for basic sustenance to self-actualization. And again, this is a bit in the philosophical realm, but that's what we're working towards, that we can enable AI to guide us into that direction.
Now, at Joinable, we, again, it's all about empowering individuals and communities to take ownership of their data and AI models. By decentralized AI infrastructure, we create an environment where anyone can contribute and benefit from the collective knowledge, elevating consciousness through shared, secure, and transparent AI capabilities. So very much in line with what Zero G is also thinking about. Now on to the third question.
And maybe Ada, did you have a comment or?
Yeah, I see a couple people wanting. I would appreciate if you can introduce about Zero G and Joinable, what you do, why you exist as a company, and address a little bit about decentralized AI. Why you should be building in a decentralized world for society, what problem you're solving. So when the people just join in, understand the company and why it exists today, are more related.
So every time somebody new comes in, I have to do this again? No, just kidding,
Yes.
just kidding. By the way, it's
You can never get tired of talking about Zero G.
No, of course.
That's why Ada asked. Yeah, and I would share a little bit about Joinable.
It's only the
after.
1000th time I've spoken. It's all good.
Yes.
It's like 3:50 a.m. for me. I just came from Singapore, so I just.
It was Dubai, Singapore, and now here.
Yeah, no, but it's a joy to be amongst you. I really love talking about this subject. But at Zero G, we're building the largest AI layer 1. We have the kind of biggest community. We have more than 300 people building on top of us, and we're essentially creating something called decentralized AI. And so, which is different from what we call centralized AI. So OpenAI, ironically, is closed AI. It's a black box system. You don't know what all of the inputs were to create that particular model, where the data came from, the labeling of the data, the censorship decisions, the alignment decisions around that, versus with decentralized AI, all of that is transparent. And so the reason why to then also build a decentralized AI is over time we look at applications in two spectrums, individual use cases to societal level use cases. So individual use cases are like order me a pizza, order flowers for Mother's Day, those types of things. And then societal level use cases are things like running a factory, running a logistics system, running an airport, running administrative and governance systems. It's especially important that these types of decisions are on a blockchain. And so we fundamentally believe there's no future in these societal level use cases unless they're on a blockchain. Because with blockchains, we figured out distribution systems, we figured out adversarial scenarios, so that when people are trying to attack kind of the truth of a network, you have defense mechanisms in place. And so very similarly for AI, when it's running critical systems, if it's not done properly, that could be the difference between an airplane crashing into another or taking off successfully. Somebody may spoof the response of a particular model, for example, and then the inference request is wrong. Or somebody might add some data injection attack, so the model becomes biased, and then, for example, only Singapore Airlines flights are taking off, no other flights are taking off. So there's a lot of issues when you start running this in a very big societal level perspective. And so these are the types of use cases we care a lot about at Zero G.
Excellent. And to Ada's point, for those who just came in, I'm Tess Howe, founder of Tess Venture, a Silicon Valley VC fund. We are, super proud investors of Zero G and 300 other companies. We've been investing in blockchain Web3 over the last 10 years. Prior to that, very entrepreneur, started companies, and then later spent some time at Stanford, hoping to learn how to be an investor that can really add value to the portfolios, the investments that we make. Of course, super proud of Toronto. I was born and raised here, So my family's still here, so very honored to be back. At the same time, I also have Gaia Labs, which is the Accelerator Incubator Initiative, and Joinable.ai, which is a company that is Web3, AI data processing platform. And also very honored to have Zero G back us as well. So we hope to bring together the ecosystem, the best of the companies within the Web3 ecosystem, even within Web2 for AI, and help others who want to come in and have their own projects or start their careers. I think that's what Zero G and Test Ventures and Joinable wants to help achieve. Now, Joinable.ai, as we shared earlier, is about data. And I think the easiest analogy to understand what we do, just to give more context, building on, for those who just came in, if you just think of a cooking analogy. When you cook, before you cook, you have to prepare the vegetables, the meat. If it's the vegetables, you need to cut it, chop it, wash it. In AI, data is the key. You need to prepare that data in order for there to be AI, and in order for AI to be useful. Of course, I'm oversimplifying it, but you can think of Joinable.ai as that technology platform that helps prepare the data at scale in an automated way. But why decentralization is important is we're building that decentralizing workforce that helps clean the data, index it, also help standardize it. And that's where decentralization is needed. And we feel that will also help the ecosystem, which we'll be sharing more at Joinable in the weeks and months to come. Again, a shout out, if everyone has Twitter, please take out your Twitter. Please follow us at Joinable.ai. That's all we ask for, and there's QR codes there. Otherwise, just punch Joinable.ai, because we just came out of stealth, and again, we want to build a community as vibrant, as amazing as Zero G. Yeah.
Well, one thing I maybe add to this point as well is, in blockchains, you have this property of provenance, and Forbes actually quoted me on this, but essentially when you do things like data cleaning or actually generating new data, you need to understand where the source came from in order to actually have some type of authenticity associated with it. So if you just put data, let's say, into a centralized database and then it keeps changing and you have no record of how it changed, then you also don't know, like, well, was this a deep fake that somebody else generated? Was it actually generated with AI? Or was it actually an authentic piece of data? And so by having a blockchain-based system, you can actually see how the ownership kind of transferred over time. Maybe you started with a piece of camera data, and then there was some cleaning process, and then there was some labeling process that was attached with it. And then you, because of that provenance, you can actually tell during this labeling process that people try to attack this data, that they try to actually label dogs as cats, for example, just to bias the underlying data so that the model itself will be biased in the future. So you can actually tell all of that from all of these record entries. And so that's why the decentralization is also very important from a transparency standpoint. To give a overly crass example, if you feed an AI model only about how to build a bomb, the type of inference requests you're going to get is exactly around that. So we want to avoid situations where you poison and bias the data too much. And so that's why what Joinable is doing is quite important and needs to live on a blockchain as well.
Now you know why we have selected Zero G as one of our significant backers, especially with Michael and the team's support. Yeah, amazing, complimentary insights. So the next question I have for Michael is, at Zero G, you're working on the infrastructure layer. What's the connection between building the foundational tech and the bigger vision of AI that serves humanity rather than extract from it? A very loaded question, but you can unpack that in as many layers as you want.
I kind of started addressing it as well, but the kind of core issue with Web2 over time, because it lives in an economic system that's built around scarcity and built around this assumption of we need to grow, especially in the public stock markets, is that in the beginning, when you don't have a lot of users, you're like, oh, come here, like OpenAI is totally free. And then over time, you start seeing monetization happen. Now you've got $20 per month, now you have $200 per month, and it's going to just increase. And the dollar per user will become more and more extractive, especially as the monopoly power increases. There's going to be a very large extraction process that happens. And so that's very much of a like Web 2 methodology. Versus with Web 3, everything is essentially written in code. It's community governed. And so that extractive process can't really happen because it's built into the network itself. That ownership is built into the network itself. And so philosophically, these two things are very orthogonal from that perspective. Web3 was created as a counter-opposing force to Web 2, so this extraction process doesn't happen the same way. And that's why we have things like tokenization as well, versus going public on a stock exchange, and then you have to consistently produce earnings per share, you have to kind of meet specific revenue milestones, profitability milestones, and then the market punishes you if you don't. And so you're forced almost to have this extractive relationship. Versus with tokenization, it actually doesn't measure that kind of earnings per share fundamental. It measures the strength of your community and how much people believe in your kind of future vision. So it's a very different system, and it's a counter-opposing force to that. And so that's why I really enjoy the Web3 ecosystem and building in the ecosystem, because it comes from a fundamentally different philosophy and perspective. And then there was another part to the question. Let me just see.
Well, the decentralized AI playing in actually, the bigger vision of AI that serves humanity rather than extracting
Okay,
it.
serves humanity.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I'll just talk about the infrastructure layer as well. The challenge of building AI in a decentralized way is that all of the infrastructure that existed up until now, we had to basically completely rebuild and scratch. So to give you an example, everybody familiar with Ethereum in this room? So what do you think Ethereum's data throughput rate is? Anybody have a guess?
It's less than 1 gigabit per second.
Yeah, when we started it was 80 kilobytes per second. What does a modern data center do for pre-training? Anybody know?
3.2 terabytes per second.
Yeah, that's like super modern. Less modern would be like hundreds of gigabytes, but you're like a million times off. Like if you need this level of infrastructure to do like pre-training on chain, we were very far from where we needed to be. So we had to really think about how do we re-architect every possible bit of this infrastructure so that we can even have AI on chain. So we had to be very systematic. We started at the decentralized storage layer, then we added the data availability layer to make sure it can quote unquote infinitely scale or horizontally scale. Just like with AWS, if you just need more scale, you just add you flip a switch and you say, give me another server, give me another virtual machine. So similarly, we had to re-architect that piece so that the data throughput isn't limited to 80 kilobytes per second, but it's like 50 gigabytes per second per consensus layer. And then we figured out a way to scale that so that you have sharding at the data level, so you can have infinite throughput, basically. Then we needed to do the same thing at the execution layer. We needed to figure out a way, how do we shard the execution layer so that you can have infinite number of transactions per second, so you can build any application fully on chain. And the same idea with like inference and then fine tuning and so on. So we had to completely redesign the infrastructure, and so that was a massive, massive lift. So it took a year plus to actually just do everything that I described. And we're not even done on the execution layer yet. So it's going to be another probably 5-6 months before we get to all of that. Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So we also, for me, I also come with like questions like that ZeroG is only for inference or both inference and the training? Like, is there many models running on the blockchain layer one, or just like you are going to construct like a big brain, like keeping feed all the different data questions?
Yeah.
So what kind of AI you are building? As you just now say, it's like it's more like you both do the training and the inference on chain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great question. So what's live right now is inference and fine tuning. So you basically figure that out. And right now the models that you can use are all the open source models.
Okay.
But ideally what should happen is that even the open source models are built in such a way that you have complete transparency. Because even the open source models, you don't exactly know what the training set was, you don't exactly know what the weights and biases were. So we want complete transparency in that. The issue is that training in a fully decentralized setting is a very hard research problem still, and it's not fully solved. So for example, what you cannot do today is say, I want to build a 400 billion parameter model, completely decentralized, across individual CPUs and GPUs that are heterogeneous in nature, that share different types of latency and are all over the world. That is a very hard problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's very nice to understand that it's like in less technical perspective, it's like a big, huge brand, not like many sub models.
I mean, you can use whatever models you want, and it's designed to be completely flexible in the future. So yeah, you can build small language models, you can build large language models over time. I'd say it will take us another 2 years before we can like completely catch up with centralized AI players on the training part specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent. Now, the next question. What does ownership of AI look like in a decentralized world? Can communities meaningfully steer its direction? And if so, how?
It's a fun question because you're already starting to see it now. For example, DeepSeek has different values embedded in it versus an OpenAI. If you ask DeepSeek R1, I asked it maybe a couple weeks ago about President Trump, and it said that President Trump was a former president. It didn't have, the training data wasn't updated for that Trump was like the current president. And then if you ask about President Xi in China, then the model says like, oh, I can't answer that. That's beyond my scope. So you can already see there's like a value system embedded into the model. So very similarly, we're going to see more models either on the kind of nation state side or on the governmental side, or even just on a community side where people want to embed certain values and biases into the model so that they can feel like I'm part of this community and I want to be part of this model. And every time that model is run, the community should benefit as part of it. And so by doing it in a decentralized way, again, you can have all the monetary flows flow back to the community. And so it's much easier than building kind of a governmental model in that way or a community-driven model that way. That's out in the open, everybody can look at the kind of source code and the provenance records and so on to participate. And so I very much see that that's going to be the future, where you have a lot more kind of models being built off each other to represent a specific community. Another thing that I'd like to see is instead of doing this kind of mixture of experts that people are doing right now in the centralized AI world, why can't we build a lot of millions, even billions plus of small language models, and then string them together with, let's say, like LLM middleware, so that you can interact with all of these millions, billions of small models as if it was one large model. That should always outperform larger kind of mixture of expert models, theoretically. If they're kind of trained correctly. So I have some questions around it. Now it's going to get into a fun debate. I know where this is going. Yeah. From a what, sorry?
I'm coming from central banking background.
Okay, great.
So my question is, what about data security in this decentralized environment, and we are doing training everything on network? So right now, even doing it in OpenAI, we don't trust it. So
Yeah.
how would, in decentralized environment, we are spreading it across multiple nodes.
Yeah.
I don't know the complete infrastructure, but
Do you think that something like federated learning is secure, or?
yeah.
So we just wrote a paper on centralized federated learning, and we're able to actually attack it and add data poisoning into it. So it was a backdoor scaffolding attack, essentially. And so even centralized federated learning is not secure. So you even have to decentralize that part. And so if you do decentralized federated learning, you can actually actively scan for backdoor attacks like that. And so blockchains, if designed correctly together with AI, should be more secure, just because you can monitor for these things, and blockchains were designed for adversarial systems, as I mentioned. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that over time, technologies like fully homomorphic encryption should be ready for prime time. It's still probably a few years away, but sorry, go ahead.
Coming from a quite cryptography background, and
Yeah.
5 we're like decades away from practical homomorphic encryption. And actually, there's big cryptographers that wrote papers about it.
Yeah.
but we will make good representations about what's feasible and what's not.
Of course, and again, I'm not a cryptography expert, but I speak with a bunch of people that are building in this space. So I spoke with one company that has sped up the FHE process by about 1,000x, which is still not enough to do like inference in a fully homomorphic encryption way, because it's still way too slow. Why would I wait for 1 token per hour or something? Like nobody's going to use that system. But in certain cases where security is really paramount, it may already be applicable to use it. Like if it's a transaction that involves $1 trillion, for example, like, am I okay waiting, a few hours or a few days? Probably. So I think we'll start seeing applications and use cases in that sense. But yeah, I don't dispute that we're still pretty far off from like actually making it like production ready. Yeah.
I like your idea about many small models. I think especially how the society is working on division and collaboration.
Yeah.
By the way, I think that's probably people should do and try to build lots of models and those models collaborate. I want to ask a question about since you are saying it's an AI operating system.
Yeah.
So what kind of functions you provide?
Yeah, so the reason why we call it an AI operating system is because what do operating systems fundamentally do is they kind of govern the underlying infrastructure or hardware, and then they provide services on top. So we've architected in a similar way. We basically, all the key components you need for AI, so you need some type of storage or memory, if you will, like where do you store your training data, your models itself, so we have this decentralized storage concept. Then we need some type of execution layer. So inference, fine-tuning, and even running applications that can then utilize inference and fine-tuning. And then we have what we call a service marketplace, or what we call, it's kind of like an app store concept, if you will. Anybody can register a network. You can register a network of GPUs, for example, that you want to provide to the network in a completely permissionless, verifiable, decentralized way that wasn't possible before. And so now the community can collaborate with you. Let's say there's multiple data centers or individuals that have a lot of H100s across the world. They can offer that as a service, and then you can tap into it as part of your inference calls, for example. And so that's essentially what it does. Yeah. So that's why we call it the operating system. Yeah.
So to speak a little bit about how Joinable sees ownership of AI. To us, it means that businesses and individuals own their data, and they have the ability to fine-tune their own AI models to meet their specific needs. By decentralizing the infrastructure, we enable communities to influence and guide the development of AI in a way that aligns with their own values and priorities. Again, data is the only substance source of competitive advantage in businesses. At Joinable, we can apply AI to your data to help organize, refine, enrich, so higher quality, easier to consume. Again, Joinable equals data. It's as simple as that, and the AI ecosystem, Web 2 or Web 3, needs high quality data. So on to the next question.
I think you had
go ahead.
You had that for a while.
Yes,
Yeah.
sorry about that.
So I'm actually just wondering, how are you preventing centralization? So like the 3.2 terabyte, that's Colossus, that's being built, right? Like it's built already.
Yeah.
And that's distributed over 100,000 nodes. You said 50 gigabits, that's basically nothing in the world of AI for, especially like, since you're not even touching training, going on inference. So even on the inference side, like no home AI system is going to be able to contribute to the system that you're proposing, mostly because it's going to consolidate at data centers.